So, hi Rongeet,
Hi, hello. Hi.
congratulations for clearing NET exam.
Thank you so much.
How are you feeling right now?
It feels great to clear the exam on your first attempt. So
Yes.
this was obviously my first attempt, and that too while pursuing my LLM at NUGS. So it feels very good that I could clear it in my first attempt itself. So yeah.
Yeah, it's a great thing that
uh,
while pursuing LLM, you have cleared your NET exam. It's very good thing, very good.
thank you so much.
Okay. So, let me just ask you that since in NET exam we have got two papers, right? Paper one
Yes.
and paper two.
Yes.
Paper one discusses about the research aptitude and the teaching aptitude.
Teacher.
And the paper two deals with your subjective part, right? It is your specialization. So, which paper was more challenging for you?
I would say paper one was more challenging. I would say, and why paper two was less challenging is because I have at least gave CLAT PG recently.
Right,
So that way, the paper two, the subject paper was basically just a like an extension of my CLAT PG preparation. To
right,
in that way, the only difference obviously was that in the NET exam it's all objective, while the CLAT PG the pattern is very different. But that way paper one was more challenging because I had to start afresh completely. Like paper one is something which obviously you're not something which you're used to, especially over the last
true,
4 5 years of law school.
true, true, true.
So it was about starting it the preparation for things like logical reasoning, maths and everything afresh. And there were new things as well, like teaching aptitude and research aptitude. That's not something that we usually get to learn at the undergraduate level, right? So that way, the research preparation was immensely helpful, especially for paper one, because paper two is still manageable again because it's a subject paper, and we have more or less a basic understanding from our undergraduate level. So paper two that way is just, I mean, we have to just focus on revision
Right,
and past year papers as well. But paper one is very significant here because again, paper one, even though it has 50 questions, I mean, if one can score 35 to at least between 35 and 40, it's very easy to clear the paper that way. Because again, on the subject paper, I don't think there is a lot of difference in terms of marks among the students, at least among the students who qualify. So
right.
that way, paper one also makes, in terms of marks, also it makes a huge difference. So
So, what was your approach for the completion of paper one portion? I mean,
so for
how did you completed it, and what was your approach? Did you practice mocks, or did you refer the previous year paper? I mean, how did you completed it? Because it is considered to be somehow like open-ended concept,
yeah.
right? You cannot compile it within a limited period of time. You just have to be quite consistent over paper one. So, just tell us like how, what was your approach?
So I think one way to go about paper one is, so one mistake we often make is, which also initially I was making for the first initial few days, is that we think that we can just use rote learning techniques and get done with paper one, but that is not how it is. Because things like research aptitude or teaching aptitude, they require a lot of conceptual understanding.
True.
And unless we grasp that conceptual understanding, it is, I mean, even if though, if one may try rote learning, it's not possible to crack the paper that way. So
Right.
at a fundamental level, it's necessary to have good conceptual understanding of research aptitude and teaching aptitude. uh, with regard to the other parts, yes, there is some degree of rote learning involved, especially in case of communication or higher education. These things you have to, learn. And I think one technique which I used was, I first initially, for both paper one and paper two, I initially looked at past year papers. So, and Due Research also provided the past year papers on their portal. So that was very helpful because by first doing all the past year's papers, I understood that, okay, that this is the kind of questions that I can expect in the exam. And it's only after doing the past year papers that I moved to, actually starting my preparation in terms of studying seriously. So that way, this is an approach which I found very helpful for me. And with respect to, say, there are areas in paper one in particular, since you asked specifically about paper one, there are areas like comprehension or maths or logical reasoning, which are very scoring. And if one practices maths on, and say, comprehension, logical reasoning related questions, it's very easy to get score even full marks in those sections. So I focused on, say, my areas of strength. That way, say, research aptitude, I'm more or less familiar with research aptitude. So that was one of my areas of strength. Alongside that, reading comprehension, logical reasoning. So these are my areas of strength. So I focused on my areas of strengths first. Then I moved on to, say, my weaknesses or areas which are not, say, my favorite areas of interest, right? That way, say maths is something which I sometimes used to struggle with at the initial days of my preparation. So again, I devoted attention to maths later, but I devoted attention to these areas once I knew that my areas of strengths were sorted and I could score full marks there. So it's only after that that I moved to my say supposed areas of weaknesses. So again, this was again one approach which I followed. But again, it's very important to start with past year papers, because otherwise, just looking at say theoretical aspects of the paper and looking at, say, course content is not good enough unless we know what kind of questions we can expect.
True.
So that's the best way to start.
Acha, how was your approach regarding this people and environment unit? Because sometimes, the current affairs questions is
Yeah.
being asked, right? So how did you prepare for that? And did you refer the current affairs books or something else, something extra effort which you have put on
So,
this?
so in terms of extra materials, there is a book by KVS Madan
Right,
which is
right.
for paper one, which I found very useful in addition to the jury search materials as well. So I studied people, environment, and development, that entire chapter from that book, and that I found very helpful. But again, that is one area which it's very difficult to predict what kind of
Like
questions you can
gray
expect.
area. I
Yeah,
must say it's a gray area.
yeah. It's very difficult. Even if one looks at past year's papers, it's very difficult to predict that, okay, that we may get questions through climate change
Right,
or related to the environment, and it's very difficult to predict the kind of questions
right.
one can expect. So luckily for me, I got the questions which I got were more or less doable, I would say. So that certainly helped. That book certainly helped me prepare. But again, past year's papers are, again, here again, I would say past year's papers, if one does, it's good. I mean, one can get a good idea of the kind of questions that the kind of areas which are important for studying, because again, that chapter is very vast. So it may not be possible to study each and every aspect from that, each and every aspect under the or subheading under that chapter. So sometimes you have to pick and choose, and the best way to pick and choose is by looking at past year papers.
Past year papers. So yes,
So
since the paper one is like an open-ended, right? Anything can
yeah,
come, right? And so one must what do is, according to you, that one must refer the past year papers,
yes,
right?
yeah,
And according to that, they must just customize their
prepare,
importance,
yes,
right? And they
yes,
must read out that topics
yes.
according to their study materials, right?
I think that is where also I would say a common mistake that I also initially was almost making is that I started with referring to all study materials first. I
Mhm.
don't think it's a good idea to just refer to study materials first. It's better always to start with past year papers and then
Right.
gradually, after one finishes all past year papers, then move to study materials.
Like yes, like first get an idea that what is being asked,
Yeah,
right? Then just go through the resource material.
yeah, exactly.
So I mean, how many previous year paper you have referred? I mean, from which year you have referred your previous
So
year paper?
broadly, I tried to refer to the last 10 years papers.
Last
So
10 years.
last 10 years.
Good.
So, yeah,
Like good.
that's a long span. But again, the pattern of the exam has changed a lot, especially in
Exactly.
the last 4 or 5 years. So I would say 2016 till before 16, 17, the paper was entirely different. You had, uh,
In 2019, there was a revision of
yeah,
syllabus.
that's the
And
paper two, yeah,
again, I guess it was around 2014 or 13 year,
yeah,
three papers were asked, right? Paper
three
one, paper
papers,
two, and paper three.
the three.
So yes, there was a consistent change, but yes, we can say that the syllabus was more or less like same for
Syllabus, yeah,
paper one.
yeah. The pattern of questions, one could say, are,
Same,
I
yes.
mean, we can expect similar questions. I would say we can expect similar questions. Right.
Apart from this Indian logic and all, right?
Yeah, those Indian logic. Though Indian logic there were a few Indian logic, I mean, questions which were asked this time, which were somewhat difficult. I would say paper one was more or less on the difficult side that way. I mean, in the previous session of the net, which I cracked. So that way, paper one, it's important to focus on past year papers as well.
Okay. Now let's talk about paper two. So
Yeah.
since you have just mentioned that you have referred the 10-year past year papers, right? Then did you see or did you witness any kind of difference between the past year paper and this instant attempt, like 2021 attempt? Was there any difference between in question pattern if we talk about specifically about the paper two, right, which is law subject? What was that difference?
So one very, one visible difference was there was a lot more focus on the minor acts, especially like say the Right to Information Act. That is something which was not there. A lot of questions were asked from the minor acts, and there were a lot of case laws as well, which were
Yeah, true.
related to the minor acts, and that is something which was very different compared to even until the previous exam. It was very different. So that was again because I had studied the bare act, even of the minor acts, and that helped me, answer those questions. I tried to answer as many questions as possible from the minor acts as well. And otherwise, I would say the pattern didn't change drastically. I would say the pattern was more similar because otherwise, since I had prepared my area of strength, area of strength was the fact that I had prepared all past year papers well.
Right.
That helped me in this exam. I would say that definitely helped me in this exam because I could understand the kind of questions to expect. For instance, say in international law, you have these questions where you have to arrange the cases in their chronological order, right? Not in international and other subjects, criminal law and other subjects as well. So unless one is aware of the past year papers, it's very difficult to even apprehend such questions.
Right.
And prepare such questions because you have to know which year, which case came and everything. So it's very difficult that way. Without
Because even I have seen the papers, right? I mean, the past year papers and this current paper. What notice the thing which I have noticed is that in the past year paper, the more and more questions were too direct, right? And if we talk about the core subjects, like on an average, 10 to 15 questions were asked. Like if we talk about constitution, if we talk about family law or international law, most of the questions were asked. But in this paper, in 2021 attempt, first of all, there were more like analytical questions were asked, right? More like statement-based questions were asked, and there was a combination of 2 or 3 concepts. Like if we take the example of IPC, right? So there was the combination of like several sections, and they were asking that which is the correct one. And it's not that it was only talking about the same heading. Like there were different headings. There was a combination. Like it was heterogeneous thing. So yes, this was a trend which I have seen in this thing. So how did you manage?
So I think one difference again, another difference which I'd like to point out is here again, since I was talking about conceptual clarity, again here for paper 2 as well, to answer specific questions, say from IPC or Constitution, one needed a lot of conceptual clarity. It was not just rote learning. Like previously, you had very direct questions, as you said, say in papers like Constitution. For instance, say the emergency provisions under the Constitution, it was a very direct question that which section refers to which provision, which article refers to which provision under the Constitution, right? This time it was I would say more conceptual and more like one had to study the bare acts at least more in depth. Right. It wasn't possible to get away with just studying the bare acts in a very superficial manner. So again, that in that respect, conceptual clarity also made a difference. And for that, it's necessary to study in depth. I would say it's not good enough anymore to just study superficially or do some rote learning and get done with the exam.
So you have to be conceptually strong if you are going to take this exam.
Definitely, you have to.
Supposedly, yes, of course, it's quite obvious that you are going to be an assistant professor, right? This exam is meant to be assistant professor. Yes, it has to be that. So, Rongeet, if I ask you that, what resources you have referred for preparing this exam?
So primarily, so firstly, as I said, past year papers, I had to procure as many past year papers as possible. That's something that's more or less available online, and UGC also provided the past year papers. For paper 2, I'll start with paper 2. For paper 2, I referred mostly to UGC materials and bare acts. And commentaries as such, in terms of, say, since I prepared for CLAT PG at USH as well, I didn't refer to too many commentaries for this exam, for the NET exam, because I thought bare acts, it was more important to focus on the bare acts and the materials, especially on the case law related materials which USH had provided. So those materials helped me immensely for paper 2. For paper 1, I relied on the USH classes, the recorded lectures which are there, mostly on paper 1, especially in terms for teaching aptitude and research aptitude. Those aspects I covered from the research lectures, and I also referred to Madan's book on paper 1. That was also very helpful. So again, I started with past year papers, then I moved to the materials. So
Okay,
yeah.
that's good. So, okay, the other portion. It's a question regarding the stress management. See, there was a time, as I remember that in our previous attempt, there were so many, dates were coming, right? There wasn't any date which was finalized. Multiple times the date were, changing. And finally it took place in the month of November. So were you stressful at that time? And if yes, then how did you manage that? And how much it is important to be, mentally prepared for this exam? If if one person is unsure about the dates, how should one should overcome all these things?
So I think the lack of clarity about the dates initially was very stressful. So I think the exam was scheduled initially in October, and then it got postponed, and got postponed twice to the end of November.
Right.
So that phase, that lack of clarity was a bit stressful. But I would say preparing for exams wasn't so stressful because I kept my composure. I had my experience of sitting for CLAT PG as well just a few months back. So that helps. So as I was more or less composed that whenever the exam takes place, I had to appear for it. And so before the exam, I made up my mind that I would need at least 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks. And I would study in this period before the exam. So I was waiting. Obviously, I tried to keep in touch with the preparation since I was also pursuing my LLM. I tried to keep in touch with my preparation as much as possible. But it's especially in the last few days, last few weeks, last couple of weeks or so, I really intensified my preparation and pursued it seriously. So that way, I would say the extension of dates was not so much of a problem. But again, the lack of clarity about when the exams will take place, that was stressful, definitely. But in terms of preparation, that is why I would suggest that it's necessary to chalk out a proper roadmap that, okay, I'll finish this part of paper 2 within this next week or so, and just chalk out a proper study plan. And it's important to stick to it. I don't think in terms of NET preparation, I don't think one requires a lot of time, but it's important to chalk out a proper roadmap so that it's actually possible to crack the exam in a month or so. So as long as one has a proper roadmap.
So you were saying that one person can crack this exam in the preparation of 1 month itself.
For me, it was very different because I just appeared for CLAT PG, right? Just a couple of months back before the 2 to 3 months back before the exam. So for me, it was easier. But if one is preparing afresh for the exam, like if one is preparing for the next cycle, it could be very different because we could get
how much time a person can require to complete the syllabus for this exam. How much time it does usually take?
I think to complete the entire syllabus and prepare and take mocks past year and prepare through past year papers and everything, it will take a couple of months or so, at least.
How many months?
Couple of months or so, I think, good enough. Especially if one finishes the past year papers first.
Okay.
I think it's possible to finish the rest in a couple of months easily, because paper 2, if one has some kind of familiar, paper 2, all of us should be having some kind of familiarity and a little bit of conceptual clarity. Paper 1 may require some time initially. So
I believe that paper 1 does require a consistent practice.
yes,
right?
certainly.
Yes. So let's talk about this this paper 2.
Yeah.
What was your approach in the completion of minor acts? I mean, there were multiple minor acts, especially if we talk about the comparative law. Right. There was a compilation of number of laws were there. Like RTI Act was there, Ombudsman is there, rule of law, and the various kind of laws were there. So did you prepare everything under comparative?
So I actually tried to prepare from the bare acts as much as possible. So
Right.
after the past year papers,
Because
I
that is the
yeah,
law which has been least bothered, right? In the
yeah,
past year papers, you might have also seen.
yeah.
Less number of questions were asked from the comparative law, and in this attempt, we have suddenly seen that the burst of the comparative law questions were there.
Yeah.
So, I mean, how did you manage?
So I would say it was a bit of so a step since I was pursuing LLM and I was within the LLM course. That
You were in
helped.
touch of this subject, right?
Yeah, that was that. That's why I was in touch with some of the comparative law,
Right.
the subjects. So that was very helpful. And besides that, as I said, I tried to study the bare acts I tried to minutely study the bare acts, especially the RTI Act and the various other acts. And again, these are for the minor acts. I didn't study any additional content as such. It was mostly just the bare
So you
acts.
were like mostly, composed to the bare acts, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And I
So
believe that, I mean, the kind
yeah,
of questions which were asked, it was enough.
yeah.
But
For in that respect, the bare acts were more or less enough because say they asked us questions from the RTI, from various sections of the RTI Act, definitions from the RTI Act, or say other procedural laws. There are very few procedural questions, but there were few
there
questions
were
from
case
the
laws also, like
yeah,
there were the case laws related to the live-in relationship.
yeah.
So, um,
For-
what would you suggest in these kind of circumstances if there is so much uncertainty around this exam? What you are going to suggest it that one should only comprised or one should only be composed to the bare act, or what should be their approach? Because see, case laws are also important.
yeah,
Once they have asked the sections, I mean, in this attempt, there is a high probability that they are going to ask the case laws right in the very next attempt. Then how the aspirants should prepare themselves? What will be your suggestion in this respect?
okay. So I would suggest aspirants to first start, as I've said, with the past year papers, because in the past year papers, we will get to know which are the important case laws which are frequently asked. That is one strategy which I also use. That okay, that these are the international law cases which are frequently asked. These are the criminal law, the constitutional law cases which are frequently asked. So that's one way of sort of trying to sort of trying to apprehend which case laws could be asked, and understanding that okay, this subject area, that case laws could be asked from this particular subject area, and maybe say subject area A is more important, subject area B is somewhat less important because it's not been asked in previous year papers. Again, these are chances which everyone has to take because the syllabus again is very vast.
Right.
So, and again, after going through all the past year papers, the next step is doing the bare acts well, particularly starting with the major acts such as the Constitution and the criminal law acts, then moving gradually to the minor acts such as the RTI. Thirdly, I would say commentaries which we have studied at the LLB level. So at jury research, we had various materials. Uh, Various materials were provided to us on the case laws. So there was a list of case laws, and the ratio and the judge and the holding of the case laws were discussed very well. So that those materials again helped us. And those materials have to be supplemented with commentaries. So broadly, preparation should be, it should be composed of all these three components: past year papers, bare acts, and commentaries and the jury research materials which I had. So broadly, it was I could sum it up that these three materials are essential for the NET exam. Again, since it's objective based and there's no negative marking,
Yeah, true, true. One can take their chances, right?
it's slightly easier. And there's I mean, one has to take certain chances for say these questions where you have to arrange cases on chronological order. Right? So you have to know at least 2 out of the 4 options to answer that questions. So broadly, this was my preparation strategy.
Yeah, it's, you just have explained in a precise and simple manner. See, this exam is not like it's not like impossible exam, but yes, one has to be prepared for the uncertainty around this exam, right? So they have to be conceptually strong because the aspirant is going to be, and they are going for the assistant professor at colleges or universities. So they have to be like conceptually strong as the exam demands. So Rongeet, what are your future plans?
So my future plan is to get into academics. So
Okay.
that's my immediate plan. So once I complete my LLM, so I'm pursuing my LLM at NUGS Kolkata. So once I pursue my LLM, I intend to enroll in a PhD and look for assistant professorship
Okay,
jobs. So
so
since I've cleared NET,
the specialization you are looking for? When you are enrolling to PhD?
so I'm specializing in international law currently, and I
International law.
intend to continue that as well in for
Okay,
my
that's
PhD
great.
and later academic endeavors. So
That's
that's probably my plan at the moment.
Yeah, great. That's great. International law is always in the news also.
Yeah,
All the very best. So thank you so much, Rongeet, for sharing
thank
your
you so much.
experience and all the very best from Research team for your future endeavors.
Thank you
Thank
so
you so
much.
much.
It's been a pleasure being to be a part of research.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you so much.